They say the most dangerous mistake a man can make is underestimating his opponent. In the cutthroat world of the Chicago syndicates, a wife is supposed to be a trophy, a frail, size 0 bargaining chip, dripping in diamonds. So when Lucas Castiglione, the ruthless head of the Midwest Commission, married Brianna Gallagher, a size 20, soft-spoken auditor with a love for oversized cardigans and sensible shoes, the underworld laughed. They called her a whale, a temporary joke, a weak link, but the laughter died in screams the night 3 heavily armed hitmen breached the Castiglione estate, expecting an easy kill. They didn't know Brianna, and they certainly didn't know how to survive her. Brianna Gallagher was undeniably fat. It wasn't a word she shied away from, nor was it a tragedy she wept over. She was thick-thighed, broad-shouldered, with a soft, round face and a stomach that pressed comfortably against the desks she sat behind. At 28, she had long ago accepted that society, and especially the men in it, viewed her as invisible, or worse, as a punchline. She didn't care. Being invisible meant people left you alone to do your job. Her job was forensic accounting for a massive logistics firm in downtown Chicago. What Brianna didn't know when she took the job was that Castiglione Freight and Shipping was a multi-million-dollar front for the most powerful mafia family in the Midwest. The collision of their worlds happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. Brianna had stayed late, her sharp eyes catching a massive, sophisticated bleed in the company's offshore accounts. Someone was skimming millions. She had printed the ledgers, highlighting the discrepancies in bright yellow ink, when the door to her office locked with a heavy metallic click. Enter Lucas Castiglione. Lucas was a man carved from marble and violence. He was tall, impeccably tailored in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, with eyes like chipped flint. He had come to the office personally because a leak had been detected, and in Lucas's world, leaks were plugged with lead. He had expected to find the trembling corporate spy. Instead, he found a heavy-set woman eating a glazed donut, surrounded by stacks of paper. "You're in my chair," Lucas had said, his voice a low, lethal baritone. Brianna hadn't flinched. She swallowed her bite, wiped her fingers on a napkin, and slid the highlighted ledger across the desk. "Whoever is running your Cayman accounts is stealing from you, to the tune of $4.2 million over the last 18 months. I'd suggest firing them, but given the men with guns standing in the hallway, I assume your HR department handles things differently." Lucas stared at her. He looked at the ledger. He looked back at her. Most men sweat, beg, or cry in his presence. Brianna just offered him a powdered sugar-dusted smile. "You aren't afraid of me," Lucas noted, leaning forward, bracing his knuckles on her desk. "Mr. Castiglione, I grew up in a trailer park in Wyoming with a father who thought the government was going to collapse every Tuesday. I've been held at gunpoint for the last slice of meatloaf. You're intimidating, sure, but you're also losing money. I just found it. You're welcome." 3 weeks later, the man skimming the money, a high-ranking underboss named Dominic Russo, was found at the bottom of Lake Michigan. And 4 weeks after that, Lucas Castiglione did the unthinkable. He asked Brianna to marry him. It wasn't a proposal born of sweeping cinematic romance. It was a tactical business transaction. Lucas's position as Don was secure, but the traditionalists in the commission were demanding he take a wife and produce an heir to solidify his dynasty. The women paraded before him were vapid, conniving daughters of other mob bosses' vipers, waiting for a chance to strike. Lucas wanted a wife who was brilliant, loyal, and entirely disconnected from the mafia's toxic politics. Furthermore, he wanted someone the other families would underestimate. A human shield of a different kind. "They will mock you," Lucas had told her bluntly, sitting in her cramped apartment, completely out of place on her floral sofa. "They will call you names. They will say I married beneath me, that I married a pig. But in my house you will be a queen. You will have access to wealth you cannot fathom, and in exchange, you will run the financial empire of my family from the shadows. You will be my most trusted advisor and my wife." Brianna had looked at him, recognizing the cold pragmatism in his eyes. She was tired of scraping by. She was tired of her mundane life. "Deal," she said. The wedding was the social event of the underworld, held at the sprawling Castiglione estate in the wealthy suburbs of Illinois. It was a display of unimaginable opulence. Brianna wore a custom-made ivory gown that flowed elegantly over her curves, her dark hair pinned up in intricate braids. She looked beautiful, but to the sharks in the room, there was blood in the water. As she walked down the aisle, the whispers were barely concealed. "Look at the size of her. My God, Lucas must be blind. I give it a year before her heart gives out, or he shoots her just to free up the bed." At the altar, Lucas took her hands. His grip was firm, reassuring. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear so that only she could hear. "Let them talk, Brianna. The loudest in the room is always the weakest. You are 10 times the woman any of them could ever hope to be." It was the first time Brianna felt a genuine flutter in her chest. She squeezed his hands back. "Let the games begin." Life in the Castiglione estate was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Brianna was given a sprawling suite of rooms, a limitless black card, and an entirely new wardrobe tailored to fit her body perfectly. For the first few months, her interactions with Lucas were strictly professional, mostly relegated to late-night meetings in his study where they pored over offshore accounts, real estate acquisitions, and money laundering operations. Brianna's mind was a steel trap. Under her guidance, the family's legitimate profits soared by 30%, but outside of Lucas's study, she was thrown to the wolves. The social hierarchy of the Chicago Mafia wives was vicious. The undisputed queen bee of the rumor mill was Francesca Marino, the razor-thin, surgically enhanced wife of Lucas Consigliere. Francesca, along with her shadow, a cruel-eyed woman named Bianca De Luca, made it their personal mission to break the whale of Chicago. The attacks were rarely direct. They were wrapped in the sweet, venomous language of high society. During a mandatory charity gala hosted by the families, Brianna found herself cornered near the champagne fountain. She was wearing a stunning, deep emerald gown that caught the light, but she felt entirely out of place among the sea of size 2 women wearing backless silk. "Brianna, darling," Francesca purred, materializing with Bianca in tow. "We were just talking about you. I was telling Bianca how brave you are, wearing green. It's such an unforgiving color, but you just don't care about the rules, do you?" Bianca giggled, sipping her champagne. "I know an incredible bariatric surgeon in Beverly Hills, Bria. He did my sister's bypass. I could get you a consultation. As a wedding gift. It's never too late to try and keep your husband's attention." Brianna held her plate of hors d'oeuvres steadily. She looked at Francesca, then at Bianca. Her heart pounded a familiar, painful rhythm, but her face remained a mask of placid indifference. "Thank you, Bianca," Brianna said smoothly, her voice carrying a calm authority that she borrowed directly from Lucas. "But Lucas seems quite satisfied with my body. In fact, he specifically mentioned how nice it is to hold a woman who doesn't feel like a bag of antlers." Francesca's smile tightened into a rigid, furious line. Before she could snap back, a heavy hand rested on Brianna's waist. Lucas had appeared from the crowd, his mere presence causing the surrounding air to drop 10 degrees. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" Lucas asked, his eyes flat and deadly as he looked at Francesca. "No, Don Castiglione," Francesca stammered, suddenly looking very small. "We were just admiring Brianna's confidence." "Good," Lucas said, pulling Brianna firmly against his side. "Because disrespecting my wife is the same as disrespecting me. And we all know what happens when I am disrespected. The two women practically fled. Lucas turned to Brianna, his gaze softening imperceptibly. You held your own. I've dealt with mean girls since middle school, Lucas. They just have better jewelry now. But what the other families and even Lucas didn't fully comprehend was the depth of Brianna's resilience. She wasn't just a corporate drone who grew up poor. Brianna had omitted a crucial piece of her history during a background check. Her father, Arthur Gallagher, wasn't just a paranoid man in a trailer park. He was a disgraced former Army Ranger, the survivalist who had dragged Brianna into the unforgiving wilderness of Wyoming every weekend of her childhood. While other girls were learning to apply lip gloss, a 12-year-old Brianna was learning how to stalk elk in 2 feet of snow. She learned how to mask her scent, how to move without snapping a twig, and how to field strip a Sig Sauer P226 in under 40 seconds blindfolded. Her father was abusive, erratic, and terrified of the world, and he had treated his overweight, quiet daughter like a child soldier. When he finally drank himself to death, Brianna packed her bags, moved to the city, ate a whole cake, and vowed never to touch a gun again. She buried her past under layers of soft flesh, comfortable clothes, and spreadsheets. She wanted peace, but she had married into a war. The murmurs of dissent within the syndicate began to grow louder. The Russo family, still seething over the execution of Dominic, began forming a quiet coalition. They saw Lucas's marriage to Brianna as a sign of weakness. To them, a don who married a civilian pig was a don who had gone soft. He was vulnerable. The whispers turned into secret meetings, and the meetings turned into a contract. They decided to cut the head off the snake, and they assumed the heavy, waddling wife would just be collateral damage. Winter hit early that year, blanketing the Northeast in a relentless sheet of white. To ease the mounting tensions and finalize a massive real estate merger with the New York families, Lucas arranged a 3-day retreat at his private compound nestled deep in the Adirondack Mountains. It was a spectacular fortress-like cabin, built of dark timber and riverstone, sitting on 200 acres of inaccessible wilderness. It was supposed to be a mix of high-level diplomacy and a rare moment of isolation for Lucas and Brianna. Over the last 8 months, their marriage of convenience had subtly shifted. The cold, business-only demeanor had thawed. Lucas had found himself lingering in her rooms, drinking scotch while she worked. He bought her rare first-edition books. He started sleeping in her bed at first, just for appearances, but then because he genuinely craved the warmth and grounding comfort she provided. Brianna, in turn, had fallen for the monster. She saw the man beneath the blood and the business, the man who protected what was his with terrifying devotion. They arrived at the cabin via private helicopter. Security was tight but deliberately unobtrusive, just 4 heavily armed Castiglione enforcers, including Lucas's most trusted captain, Paulie. On the second night, a massive blizzard rolled in, dropping whiteout conditions over the mountains. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the thick, reinforced glass of the cabin. At 9 p.m., Lucas received a call on the satellite phone. It was an emergency within the New York Commission. A sit-down was demanded immediately at a neutral location 30 miles down the mountain. "I can't take you with me into a contested room," Lucas told Brianna, shrugging on his heavy wool overcoat and checking the magazine of his sidearm. "It's a power play by the Russos. I have to go, or I look weak. I'm leaving Paulie and 2 men with you. Lock the doors. Stay by the fire. I'll be back before dawn." He kissed her forehead, a lingering press of his lips, and vanished into the storm with his driver. Brianna was left in the massive, silent cabin. She made herself a mug of hot cocoa, wrapped herself in a thick cashmere blanket, and sat by the roaring fireplace with a novel. For 2 hours, the only sound was the crackle of burning logs and the shrieking wind outside. Then the power went out. The cabin plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The sudden silence from the hum of the generator was deafening. Brianna froze, her mug halfway to her lips. In the city, power outages were normal. In a compound equipped with 3 backup generators, it meant one thing: someone had manually cut the lines. "Paulie?" Brianna called out. Her voice sounded small in the massive, vaulted living room. No answer. She stood up, her bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. She padded quietly toward the kitchen where she had last seen one of the guards. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light provided by the dying embers in the fireplace, she saw a dark shape slumped over the kitchen island. It was the guard, his throat neatly slashed, his blood pooling silently on the granite countertop. Brianna's breath hitched. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She backed away, her mind racing. She needed Paulie. She turned toward the front hall, but froze as a heavy, muffled thump echoed from the porch. The front door groaned under the weight of someone forcing the heavy biometric lock. "They are here for Lucas," her mind screamed, "but Lucas is gone. Which means they are here for me." At that moment, the Brianna Gallagher who crunched numbers and smiled politely at vicious mob wives died. In her place, the ghost of Arthur Gallagher's child soldier woke up. The years of suppressing her instincts shattered instantly. Adrenaline flooded her veins, slowing time down to a crawl. Her size, often seen as a hindrance, suddenly meant she had mass power and an unshakable center of gravity. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She stripped off her heavy cashmere blanket and her fuzzy socks, leaving herself in dark leggings and a tight black sweater. She needed to move silently. She slipped into the shadows of the hallway just as the front door was breached with a muted crack. 3 figures stepped into the cabin. They wore white winter camouflage, night vision goggles, and carried suppressed submachine guns. Professionals, ghost walkers. They move with terrifying, lethal precision. Target is the Don. The fat bitch is a secondary objective. A voice whispered over a tactical radio, the sound barely audible over the wind. "Clear the ground floor." Brianna watched from the darkness of the hall, pressing her back against the wooden paneling. She was unarmed. She needed a weapon. She knew Lucas kept a hidden cache in his study on the 2nd floor, but she couldn't risk the stairs yet. One of the assassins, a tall man holding a suppressed MP5, broke off from the group, moving silently toward the kitchen to check the perimeter. He was moving exactly how Brianna's father had taught her to move through the woods heel to toe, sweeping the corners. Brianna waited until he passed the narrow alcove where the coat closet was hidden. She held her breath, suppressing the tremor in her hands. As the assassin stepped past her hiding spot, his focus directed toward the kitchen island, Brianna moved. She lunged from the shadows. She didn't try to punch or kick, she used her environment and her weight. She grabbed the back of the assassin's tactical vest with both hands, using her 240-pound frame to violently yank him backward off his center of balance. The man gasped in surprise, his feet flying out from under him. Before he could hit the floor or raise his weapon, Brianna drove all her weight down onto him, slamming his head mercilessly against the sharp, decorative corner of a solid oak cadenza. There was a sickening crunch. The assassin went limp instantly, sliding to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Brianna didn't pause to look at his face. She immediately stripped his night vision goggles off, tossing them aside. They would ruin her natural night sight, and grabbed his MP5, checking the safety and the magazine by touch alone. It was a full clip. She also pulled a serrated combat knife from his chest rig and slid it into her waistband. "Viper 2, report." A voice crackled from the dead man's earpiece. "Did you find the pig?" Brianna reached down, pressed the transmit button on the comms unit, and didn't say a word. She just let the silence hang, then crushed the earpiece beneath her heel. Let them be confused. Let them be afraid. She rapped the bolt of the submachine gun with a soft, metallic click. The soft, heavy wife of Lucas Castiglione wiped a smear of blood from her cheek. The hunt had begun. The comms unit beneath Brianna's heel snapped with a satisfying crunch, cutting off the voice of the assassin leader. She stood in the suffocating darkness of the hallway, her bare feet silent against the freezing hardwood. Her heart was beating a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. It was a state of hyperfocus she hadn't experienced since she was 15, tracking a wounded buck through a Wyoming blizzard with her father screaming in her ear. Only this time, there was no screaming. There was only the howling wind of the Adirondacks battering the thick windows of the cabin. She gripped the cold steel of the MP5, her finger resting just outside the trigger guard. She knew the layout of this sprawling 12,000-square-foot compound intimately. Over the past few months, she had memorized every creaking floorboard, every blind spot, every heavy oak door. The men invading her home were relying on night vision goggles and tactical training, but in a pitch-black, unfamiliar environment, technology was a crutch. Brianna was relying on memory, instinct, and the undeniable advantage of home turf. Carter Sitrup, a voice echoed faintly from the massive living room. It was the leader. His voice was tight, stripped of the arrogant ease he had possessed when they first breached the door. 2 is unresponsive. I'm moving to the kitchen. Hold the stairs. Brianna pressed herself against the flocked wallpaper of the corridor. She had to move. The kitchen was a dead end, and once the leader found his man with a crushed skull, they would know they weren't hunting a terrified, helpless housewife. They would switch from a sweeping operation to a targeted kill box. She needed the high ground. She slipped away from the alcove, moving heel to toe, letting her weight roll smoothly across the floorboards to avoid putting sudden pressure on the joints of the wood. It was an agonizingly slow process. For a woman of her size, moving with the silence of a ghost required immense core strength and absolute control. Her muscles burned, but the adrenaline masked the fatigue. She reached the base of the sweeping mahogany staircase just as a beam of green laser light cut through the darkness of the living room, panning across the stone fireplace. Carter, the third assassin, was moving toward the stairs, his weapon raised, sweeping the angles. Brianna didn't try to run up the stairs. That would expose her back and make noise. Instead, she ducked beneath the heavy, overhanging curve of the staircase, slipping into the wedge of deep shadow where Lucas kept a massive, imported antique grandfather clock. She pressed her back against the wall, her breath coming in slow, measured counts of 4. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Don't shoot unless you have to, her father's gravelly voice echoed in her memory. Gunfire tells everyone exactly where you are. In the dark, a knife is a whisper. A gun is an alarm bell. She holstered the MP5 on its tactical sling, letting it rest against her hip, and drew the serrated combat knife she had taken from the dead man. The grip was textured rubber, cold and reassuring in her palm. Footsteps approached, slow, methodical, the soft squeak of tactical rubber soles on polished wood. Carter was terrified. He could smell the copper scent of blood from the kitchen, and the silence of the massive house was messing with his nerves. "Gillett," Carter whispered frantically into his radio, pausing just 3 feet from where Brianna was hidden in the pitch black. "I don't like this man. 2 is down." The target was supposed to be alone. Did Castiglione leave a security detail we didn't know about? "Shut up and clear the stairs," Gillert's voice hissed through the earpiece, loud enough for Brianna to hear in the dead quiet. "It's just a fat bitch. 2 probably slicked in the dark and cracked his own head. Move. Purr! Carter let out a shaky breath and took a step toward the first stair. He was focused upward, his night vision goggles scanning the second-floor landing. He completely ignored the dark alcove beneath the stairs. It was a fatal rookie mistake. You never clear a room without checking the dead space behind you. Brianna didn't hesitate. She stepped out of the shadows, bringing her immense grounded weight with her. She didn't try to stab him in the back. Armor would stop it. Instead, she stepped directly into his blind spot, raised her left arm, and hooked it violently around his throat, clamping his windpipe tight. Carter flailed, letting out a choked, wet gasp. He tried to bring his weapon up, but Brianna was already driving her right hand upward. She drove the heavy, serrated blade of the combat knife up under the bottom edge of his tactical helmet, right into the soft, unprotected flesh beneath his jaw. She used her entire body weight, driving the blade upward through his palate and into his brainstem with a sickening, wet thunk. Carter's body seized instantly. His fingers spasmed on the trigger of his MP5, sending a chaotic, suppressed spray of bullets into the ceiling weapon chandelier above them before the gun jammed. Brianna rode his collapsing body to the floor, keeping her weight pressed against his back to muffle the sound of his armor hitting the wood. She yanked the knife free, wiping the hot, thick blood onto his white camouflage jacket. She was panting now, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. 2 down, 1 to go. But the suppressed gunfire had ruined her element of surprise. From the kitchen, a beam of blinding, tactical white light snapped on, cutting through the darkness like a physical blade. Gillett had abandoned his night vision. He knew the stealth phase was over. "Who are you?" Gillett roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The calm professional was gone, replaced by the panicked fury of a man who realized he was locked in a cage with a predator. "Castiglione, is that you? You want to play games in the dark?" Brianna didn't answer. She unslung her borrowed MP5, flicked the selector switch to burst fire, and retreated silently up the stairs, leaving Carter's bleeding corpse at the bottom step. The end game had arrived. The second floor of the compound was a labyrinth of guest suites, ending in a heavy, reinforced oak door that led to Lucas's private study in the master bedroom. Brianna moved with agonizing precision down the long, carpeted hallway. She needed a choke point. She was strong, and she had the element of surprise, but a prolonged firefight against a highly trained mercenary was a losing equation. She had to force him into a mistake. She slipped into Lucas's study, pushing the heavy oak door almost entirely shut, leaving it cracked just an inch. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and a wall of reinforced glass overlooking the snow-battered mountains. The wind was screaming outside, shaking the glass and providing the perfect auditory cover. Downstairs, the heavy, rhythmic thud of Gillert's boots began to ascend the staircase. He wasn't sneaking anymore. He was furious, sweeping the tactical light violently back and forth. "Cavan Russo sends his regards, Mrs. Castiglione," Gillett taunted, his voice dripping with venom as he reached the top landing. "I know you're up here, and I know you're not the one who took out my men. Lucas left a ghost behind, huh? A little security detail for his heavy, pathetic little wife." I hide." Brianna knelt behind the heavy mahogany desk, resting the barrel of the MP5 on the polished wood, aiming squarely at the crack in the door. The mention of Cavan Russo, the patriarch of the Russo crime family, and Dominic's uncle confirmed exactly what this was. It wasn't just a hit, it was a decapitation strike against the Castiglione Empire. If Lucas is in a meeting with the New York families right now, the thought hit Brianna like a physical blow. The meeting is a trap. They separated us to slaughter us simultaneously. A surge of blinding, possessive rage washed over her. These men thought they could just march into her home, insult her, kill her husband, and take what they had built. They looked at her and saw a punchline. They were about to find out exactly why Lucas had chosen her. Gillett kicked open the door to the first guest suite, clearing it with a burst of suppressed fire. "Come out, come out. I'm going to make this slow, pig. You hear me? Cavan wants a piece of you to send to Lucas's funeral." Brianna remained absolutely still. She reached out in the dark, her fingers finding a heavy crystal whiskey decanter sitting on a side table. She picked it up, feeling its solid, crushing weight. Gillett's heavy footsteps approached the study. The tactical beam of light sliced through the crack in the door, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. The door groaned as a heavy boot slammed into it, kicking it wide open. It hit the wall with a thunderous crash. Gillett stepped into the threshold, his weapon raised, the light sweeping across the bookshelves and the empty leather chairs. "Last stop," he sneered. He stepped deeper into the room, past the threshold, effectively trapping himself in the fatal funnel. Brianna didn't shoot. She knew the muzzle flash would blind her and give away her exact position. Instead, she stood up from behind the desk, her dark clothing blending perfectly with the shadows, and threw the heavy crystal decanter with all her might. It flew through the darkness and smashed brilliantly against the side of Gillett's tactical helmet. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, the impact violently snapping Gillett's head to the side. He staggered, dropping the flashlight which rolled across the floor, throwing crazy, spinning shadows across the walls. He fired wildly into the dark, the spray of bullets tearing through the bookshelves and showering Brianna in shredded paper and splinters. She didn't retreat, she charged. Using her powerful legs, Brianna launched herself forward, closing the 10 feet between them in a split second. She crashed into Gillett like a freight train, dropping her shoulder and hitting him squarely in the chest. The sheer, overwhelming force of her 240-pound frame hitting him at full speed sent them both flying backward. Gillett gasped, but the air was forcefully expelled from his lungs. They crashed through the heavy glass of the display cabinet behind him, raining shards over the carpet. But Gillett was a professional killer. As they fell, he released his jammed rifle, drew a tactical karambit from his belt, and slashed wildly upward. The curved blade caught Brianna across the left bicep. Pain white-hot and agonizing exploded up her arm, slicing through muscle and drawing a torrent of warm blood. Brianna screamed, a raw, primal sound, but she didn't pull away. Letting him create distance was death. Instead, she collapsed all of her weight directly on top of him, pinning him to the floor amidst the broken glass. She ignored the burning agony in her arm, grabbed his knife wrist with her right hand, and slammed it against the hardwood floor until his fingers went numb and the karambit clattered away. "Get off me." Gillett wheezed, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief as he stared up into the shadowed, furious face of the woman he had been sent to slaughter. He bucked his hips, trying to dislodge her, but Brianna was an immovable mountain of muscle, adrenaline, and rage. She drew her own serrated knife from her waistband. "My husband," Brianna snarled, her voice a low, terrifying growl that she didn't recognize as her own, "does not have a pathetic wife." She brought the knife down, bearing it to the hilt in the soft space just above his clavicle, severing the subclavian artery. Gillett's eyes rolled back, a wet rattle escaping his chest before his body finally went limp beneath her. Brianna stayed there for a long time, the heavy metallic smell of blood mixing with the freezing air blowing in from the shattered window. Her arm was bleeding heavily, soaking the sleeve of her sweater. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving her shivering, exhausted, and covered in gore. 30 minutes later, the roar of a heavy engine cut through the screaming wind. Tires tore through the snowed-in driveway, slamming to a halt near the porch. Doors flung open. Lucas Castiglione, his Tom Ford coat covered in snow and his face pale with a terror he had never known in his 35 years of life, sprinted through the shattered front door of the cabin. His sidearm was drawn, his eyes frantic. He had figured it out 15 miles down the mountain. The road had been blocked by a felled tree, and an ambushed squad of Russo men had been waiting in the tree line. Lucas and his driver had barely survived the firefight, but the moment Lucas saw the Russo colors, he realized the horrific truth. The sit-down was a diversion. The real target was the cabin. The real target was Brianna. Lucas roared, his voice cracking as he stepped into the living room. His eyes swept the destruction, the dead guard in the kitchen, the body of the assassin with his skull caved in near the coat closet, the bloody corpse of Carter at the bottom of the stairs, his throat destroyed. Panic, icy and absolute, gripped Lucas's heart. He took the stairs 2 at a time, slipping on the slick blood on the landing. Brianna! He screamed again, throwing open the door to his study. The room was destroyed. Bullet holes riddled the walls. The display case was shattered, and sitting in his heavy leather wingback chair, lit by the weak moonlight filtering through the storm, was his wife. She was covered in blood. Her left arm was wrapped tightly in a makeshift tourniquet torn from a curtain. At her feet lay the massive, armored body of Gillett, dead in a pool of dark crimson. Brianna was holding a bottle of his finest, oldest scotch in her uninjured hand, taking a slow, shaky sip directly from the blast neck. Lucas froze, his gun dropping to his side. His chest heaved as he stared at the carnage, his brilliant, ruthless mind struggling to process the impossible scene before him. He had rushed back expecting to find the woman he loved slaughtered. Instead, he found her sitting on a throne of her enemies. Brianna looked up at him. Her eyes were exhausted, but a small, tight smile touched her lips. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice raspy. "The Russos are making a move. Also, they owe us a new rug." Lucas dropped to his knees in front of her, entirely ignoring the dead assassin. He reached out with trembling hands, gently cupping her blood-spattered face. He didn't see a whale. He didn't see a weak link. He saw a queen who had just defended her castle with the savagery of a lioness. "You killed them," Lucas whispered, awe and dark, terrifying devotion bleeding into his voice. "You killed them all." "They interrupted my reading," Brianna replied, leaning her heavy, tired head into his palm. Lucas pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair, not caring about the blood or the gore. The underworld had laughed at him for marrying a soft, heavy-set accountant. But as Lucas held his wife, surrounded by the bodies of the men who had underestimated her, he knew one undeniable truth. The commission was about to burn, and his wife was going to strike the match. The aftermath of the Adirondack ambush was a masterclass in organized chaos. Within an hour of Lucas's arrival, a specialized Castiglione cleanup crew descended upon the mountain compound. They moved like phantoms, scrubbing blood from the hardwood, replacing shattered glass and loading the bodies of Gillett, Carter, and the unknown kitchen assassin into the back of a refrigerated transport truck. In the master bathroom, Lucas sat on the edge of the marble tub, carefully stitching the deep laceration on Brianna's left bicep. He had refused to let the syndicate's mob doctor touch her. His hands, usually instruments of extortion and violence, were shockingly gentle as he threaded the surgical needle through her skin. Brianna sat stoically, a glass of amber liquid resting on her thigh. She didn't wince. Her adrenaline had leveled out into a cold, hardened resolve. "Kevin Russo is going to deny he ordered the hit," Lucas said quietly, tying off the last suture and snipping the thread. He wrapped her arm in crisp white gauze. He used outside contractors. Ghost walkers. There's no direct paper trail linking the Russos to the men who breached this house. Brianna took a slow sip of her scotch. He doesn't need a paper trail, Lucas. He needs money. You don't hire 3 elite mercenaries to assault a fortified compound on a whim. That level of operational security, the night vision tech, the helicopter they undoubtedly had waiting nearby, that costs millions. Millions that had to be moved quietly. Lucas looked up at her, his dark eyes searching her face. And I am an accountant, Brianna said, a dangerous smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Give me access to the central server in Chicago. Cavan thinks he's playing a game of bullets. I'm going to show him how to play a game of numbers. For the next 2 weeks, the Chicago underworld was a powder keg waiting for a spa. The rumor mill was operating at a fever pitch. Whispers leaked from the Castiglione camp that the hit squad had been entirely wiped out. But the detail that no one could verify, the detail that had men in smoke-filled back rooms laughing nervously into their whiskey, was the identity of the executioner. The whale killed them. The fat wife took out Gillert's crew, Francesca Marino and Bianca De Luca. The vicious vipers of the country club set dismissed it as propaganda. Lucas is trying to make her look like a mobster. Francesca had sneered over martinis at the Drake Hotel. She probably hid in a closet eating truffles while Lucas's guards did the work. But the bosses weren't so sure. Lucas Castiglione hadn't retaliated. He hadn't sent shooters to the Russo strongholds. Instead, the Castiglione family went completely dark. Emboldened by Lucas's apparent inaction, Cavan Russo made his move. He called a mandatory meeting of the Midwest Commission at the Grand Continental, an exclusive, heavily guarded social club in downtown Chicago. Cavan intended to use the sit-down to propose a restructuring of territories, arguing that Lucas had proven himself incapable of maintaining peace. He was going to vote Lucas out or force a war Lucas couldn't win. The night of the commission meeting, a torrential downpour washed the neon-lit streets of Chicago. Inside the Grand Continental's private boardroom, the heads of the 5 families sat around a massive mahogany table. Cavan Russo, a thick-necked, silver-haired bulldog of a man, sat at the opposite end of the empty chair reserved for the Castiglione Don. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Lucas Castiglione walked in, immaculate in a midnight blue suit, his presence instantly dropping the temperature in the room. But it was the woman walking beside him that caused the room to fall into a stunned, breathless silence. Brianna Gallagher Castiglione had not come to hide. She wore a custom-tailored, blood-red pantsuit that hugged her wide hips and broad shoulders, projecting absolute, unapologetic power. The deep V-neck of the silk blouse beneath revealed the edge of a jagged, bruised scar on her collarbone, a souvenir from the glass display case. Her dark hair was slicked back and her eyes were lined with sharp, predatory black eyeliner. She took up space. She owned the air in the room. She was magnificent, and she was terrifying. Behind them walked Paulie, carrying 2 massive leather briefcases. "Lucas," Cavan said, recovering his composure, though a muscle feathered in his jaw, "we weren't expecting your wife. Commission business is for the heads of the families." Lucas didn't sit down. He pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, gestured for Brianna to take it, and stood behind her, resting his hands proprietorially on her broad shoulders. It was the ultimate display of submission and respect. He was yielding his throne to her. "My wife is the reason I am alive to attend this meeting, Cavan," Lucas said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Therefore my wife has the floor. I suggest you all listen very carefully." Brianna steepled her fingers, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. She looked around the room, making eye contact with Salvatore Vitiello, Lorenzo Falcone, and finally settling her cold gaze on Kevin Russo. "Good evening, gentlemen," Brianna said, her voice smooth and conversational. "As many of you know, my background is in forensic accounting. I find that numbers tell a much more honest story than men do. For instance, 2 weeks ago, 3 highly trained mercenaries breached my home." "A tragedy," Kevin interrupted, feigning sympathy. "But we have no knowledge of who sent them, Mrs. Castiglione." "The streets are dangerous." "The streets are predictable, Kevin," Brianna corrected sharply, dropping the polite facade. "Just like your offshore routing protocols." She snapped her fingers. Hawley stepped forward, opened the briefcases, and dropped thick stacks of bound financial ledgers in front of every boss at the table. "You see," Brianna continued, her voice rising with quiet, deadly authority, "mercenaries require a retainer. Gillet's crew was paid $2.5 million up front. A sum that large, wired quickly, leaves a digital wake. I spent the last 14 days tracing that wake. It led me to a shell corporation in the Maldives, which was funded by a holdings company in Panama, which was directly tied to the Russo family's maritime shipping profits." Kevin's face turned the color of bruised plum. "This is a fabrication. You forged these documents to start a war." "I didn't forge anything," Brianna said, leaning forward, the red silk of her suit catching the low light. "But I did do a little administrative cleanup. While I was inside your Panamanian accounts, I noticed your operational security was incredibly outdated. A child could bypass your firewalls. The room was so quiet, the sound of the rain hitting the glass outside sounded like gunfire." "What did you do?" Kevin demanded, his voice dropping into a guttural growl. Brianna offered him a sweet, terrifying smile. "I took it all, Kevin. Every single cent." Chaos erupted around the table. Salvatore Vitiello frantically flipped through the ledger placed in front of him, his eyes widening in horror as he read the transaction logs. $85 million, Brianna announced, her voice slicing through the shouting. "Liquidated, rerouted through 72 different blind trusts across Eastern Europe and Asia. The money that funds your bribes, your soldiers, your illegal imports, it is gone. You are completely bankrupt, Kevin. As of this morning, you couldn't afford to pay a parking ticket, let alone your capos." Kevin slammed his heavy fists on the table, rising to his feet. "You fat, arrogant bitch! I will kill you myself. I'll carve you into pieces." He reached inside his tailored jacket, his hand wrapping around the grip of a concealed revolver. It was a desperate, foolish move of a cornered animal. He was violating the sacred truce of a commission sit-down. He didn't even clear the holster. A deafening crack shattered the air of the boardroom. Kevin froze. A neat, perfectly round hole appeared in the direct center of his forehead. His eyes rolled back, and his massive body collapsed backward, crashing over his chair and hitting the carpeted floor with a sickening thud. Smoke drifted lazily from the barrel of the suppressed tactical pistol in Lucas's hand. He hadn't even blinked. He stood behind Brianna, his weapon still raised, his eyes scanning the remaining bosses around the table. "Does anyone else have an issue with my wife's accounting methods?" Lucas asked, his voice a chilling, hollow whisper. Nobody moved. Lorenzo Falcone slowly raised his hands, palms open, pushing his chair back an inch. Salvatore Vitiello swallowed hard, staring at the pooling blood creeping across the floor from Kevin's body. They were hardened killers, men who had ordered dozens of hits, but they had just witnessed an absolute, flawless dismantling of a dynasty. Brianna had destroyed the Russo family financially, and Lucas had finished it physically. They were an unstoppable apex predator. Brianna didn't flinch at the gunshot or the body. She slowly stood up from the head of the table. She smoothed the front of her red suit, picking up her leather portfolio. "The Russo territories are hereby absorbed by the Castiglione family," Brianna announced. looking at the pale faces of the remaining bosses. Their remaining capos have 24 hours to pledge loyalty to my husband, or they will find their personal bank accounts similarly emptied. We will be raising the family tax by 5% to cover the cost of the mess we had to clean up in the mountains. Are we agreed? Agreed. Salvatore Vitiello choked out. Agreed, Don Castiglione. Mrs. Castiglione. The other bosses nodded in rapid, terrified succession. Lucas lowered his weapon, sliding it back into his shoulder holster. He looked down at Brianna, the fierce, burning pride in his eyes undeniable. He offered her his arm. She looped her hand through it, her warm, heavy curves pressing against his side. Together they turned their backs on the dead man and walked out of the boardroom. The shift in the Chicago underworld was instantaneous and absolute. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the Russo family had ceased to exist. Their soldiers had folded, their lieutenants had begged for mercy, and the streets belonged entirely to Lucas. But the most satisfying victory for Brianna came 2 nights later at the annual winter gala held at the Field Museum. The museum was closed to the public, rented out for the syndicate's elite. The room was dripping in diamonds and champagne. As Lucas and Brianna descended the grand marble staircase, the entire hall fell silent. The whispers that usually accompanied Brianna were gone. There were no jokes about her size, there were no sneers about her clothes. Instead, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Standing near the base of the stairs were Francesca Marino and Bianca De Luca. The 2 women looked pale and gaunt in their designer gowns. They had heard the stories. Everyone had. They knew exactly who had orchestrated the fall of the Russos, and they knew the monster that hid beneath Brianna's soft exterior. As Brianna approached them, Francesca visibly trembled. The razor-thin woman stepped aside, lowering her eyes to the floor. "Good evening, Brianna," Francesca whispered, her voice shaking with genuine terror. "You look stunning tonight." Brianna paused. She looked Francesca up and down, feeling the absolute weight of her own power. She didn't need to insult the woman. She didn't need to threaten her. Her mere existence was the threat. "Thank you, Francesca," Brianna said, offering a serene, untouchable smile. "Make sure you eat something tonight, dear. You look a bit frail. The wind in Chicago can be terribly unforgiving to weak things." Francesca swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "Yes. Thank you, Brianna." Brianna walked past them, Lucas's hand resting firmly on the small of her back. They moved toward the massive, illuminated display of the T-Rex in the center of the hall. "You're enjoying this," Lucas murmured in her ear, pulling her close so her back rested against his chest. "I prefer spreadsheets," Brianna admitted, turning her head to press a soft kiss to his jawline. "But I have to admit, destroying the men who tried to kill you was mildly satisfying." Lucas chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated against her back. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He didn't care who was watching. He wanted every man and woman in the room to see who held his heart and who held the keys to their empire. "You are a terrifying woman, Brianna Castiglione," Lucas whispered, pressing his lips to the scar on her collarbone. "They thought I married a lamb to slaughter." Brianna leaned back into his embrace, watching the reflection of the terrified, bowing elite in the glass display cases. She placed her hands over Lucas's, feeling the cool metal of his wedding band. "Let them think whatever they want," Brianna said softly, her eyes glinting with a dangerous, brilliant light. "A lamb might get slaughtered, Lucas, but a whale can sink the whole damn ship. If you loved this story of power, revenge, and unexpected romance, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button to support the channel, and let us know you want more thrilling mafia dramas. Hit share to send this epic tale to your friends who love a badass, underestimated heroine who flips the script and takes down the bad guys. And most importantly, Make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single upload. We release new jaw-dropping stories every week, and you won't want to miss what we have coming next. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite part of Brianna's revenge. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.